Welcome to the GRN, the Growth and Resilience Network, where every episode brings you targeted stories and strategies about professional and personal growth and resilience. The intent of each episode is to educate, energize, and equip you with information and hopefully a bit of wisdom to apply in your life and within your community. Hi, I'm Steve Piscitelli, your host, coming to you from my headquarters, my world headquarters, here in Atlantic Beach, Florida. Today we're going to talk about local music. Original music, touring artists. Someone has to orchestrate that stuff. And in the studio, we have Ray Lewis, who is a self-described concert presenter. You can go to his website at raylewispresents with an S, raylewispresents.com, and that Lewis is spelled Lewis. And we're going to learn a little bit about his journey, but really focus on local music. And as an added feature, we had a guest drop by the studio just before we started recording this session. That's, I won't even introduce him yet. We'll just bring him in at some point. The mystery guest. So, Ray, welcome.
Good morning.
I'm glad you made it out to the beach, and we're glad you're here. You started off in corporate America. Then you got your college degree, going to school at nights. You had a nomination to be in Leadership Jacksonville. How in the world do you make it into the concert presenting business?
That goes back to college at University of North Florida, where I was the president of the Sawmill Slough Conservation Club. And a group that called themselves Earth Center Incorporated brought the Earth Day celebration to UNF. It may have been around 1977.
So it wasn't the first year?
No, 70 was the first year, the first Earth Day year. Mm-hmm. And they'd been doing events all over town, and they stepped up their game and came out there. And Sharon Cobb was the one that was the main force behind that. And she told me that she wanted me, I think in 78, she told me she was going to stop doing it and wanted me to take it over. And so from that first year out there, I was showing people how to eat cattails on the nature trails. And then I apprenticed under Sharon Cobb. And in 1979, I planned and following all of her footsteps. We had Melanie out there that first year, along with a lot of local bands like Justin and
Justin,
yes, and then I can't remember the Palmer Khalil, Larry Mangum, Jamie DeFreitas, and just many more. And there was many people on campus that year. They had to park on St. John's Bluff, so it was a real big event that year.
Mm-hmm. Wow! And then that hooked you.
Yes, and I started going to the local listening room, Applejacks, to hear more music, and then after 1980, people were calling me, like the radio station. After 1980, they built the Pepsi drink down for it out at the Regency Square parking lot, and they had so many Pepsis left. They started calling me, wanting me to bring music out there. And Ed McCullers from that event asked me to do music for the bed races they held out here at the beaches, and people were calling me to find music for people who were in nursing homes and things like that. And Applejacks, I was so much there as a regular, they put me to work. I was working the door, then later on managed for them.
Wow. And then one thing leads to another. And now, the Ray Lewis Presents, how long have you been doing that?
Well, I've had several different names for what I was doing over the years, but Ray Lewis Presents, I think it's been about 12 years now.
12 years. When we were putting this together, I had said, so you promote local music, and then you had also tagged onto it, and touring artists.
Yes, about 12 years ago, Larry Mangum and I got together, and we had seen the format work at the Florida Theater with some big names, so we started what we call the Songwriter Circle, and our guest for the very first one there 12 and a half years ago was Jamie DeFreitas and Mike Shackelford, and we started doing one a month. And I remember owners because it's Mudville said, "Well, this won't last very long because they thought we'd run out of people," and yeah, it never did run out. And we were doing shows regular there, and I asked, and I kind of started bringing in people, touring artists at the same time too, and because I want to support as much as I can the touring artists, because it's even more and more difficult every year out there for them.
Mm-hmm. So they're going from, they might be going from Savannah to Daytona. They come through Jacksonville, and they have a night that they can perform.
Yes, and we went into a format at European Street that was already solid there. Then, and it began to grow. So I asked them about going to their second location from San Marco over to Beach Boulevard in Jacksonville, and I started bringing in a lot of national touring artists and doing some of the songwriter circles over there. I think you even played at one of them.
I did, yeah. It was a slow night, yes. Now, you mentioned, and for people who listening, and the one or two who might not know Larry Mangum, he is?
Well, he's originally from North Carolina. He moved down here after college to work with the Navy, aerospace engineer, and of course his music kept driving him too. I think he quit 2 or 3 times to do music.
He had a studio, didn't he?
Yes, Mangum Alford Studio, and he didn't give up his dream of music, even though like I said, he left his real good job a few times, and they took him back. He was very fortunate. That don't happen very often.
Yeah. And you mentioned one Mike Shackelford, and he was the first of the Songwriter Circle, you said, correct? And he was at the Earth Day event that was instrumental in launching you.
That's correct. And of course, his band Justin is where his infamous music career started here in Jacksonville. They came to Jacksonville, and he ended up staying here 40 years later, I believe.
Yeah, and I got to know him about that time, and at times I just can't get rid of him because sitting next to you is one Mike Shackelford who just showed up.
Good morning, Mike.
Good morning, boys.
He actually came to deliver. What did you deliver to us today?
I brought you and your beautiful wife meatballs from my beautiful wife.
The best meatballs in the world.
Oh, thank you. I'll pass that on to her. Well, you said when I thanked you for covering my gigs when I was sick with the flu earlier in the month, I said, I owe you, and you said meatballs. So there you go, man. Paying my debt is what I'm doing.
All right, Shaq. And by the way, for folks listening, if you go to the first episode of this podcast channel, you will find Mike Shackelford.
Oh.
He was the initial guest. Mike, why does a community need a Ray Lewis?
Well, I can tell you right now that from the time Kent and I, with our band Justin, came to Jacksonville in '76, as I might have stated in the very first podcast we did, our main goal was to find local entertainers that were doing original music. That was a big thing for us. Although we covered a lot of ground with our all the other songs that we did, we always tried to unearth original material by local people, obscure cuts from albums that we loved. So when I came to Jacksonville, we looked that stuff up, and one thing led to another. And then we were on the Earth Fest, I believe it was '78. I have pictures from that. I know that Larry was there. I know Jamie was there. My band, Justin, Kent, Lane Barrett, Kim Ramsey. So that's the year. That was '78, I believe. Wow. And the place was amazing. I mean, the whole scene was electric. And then Applejack's was the coup. If you were going to play in town, although we had a great gig at Steak and Ale, but if you wanted to play in front of an audience that completely appreciated original music and musicianship, Applejack's was the place to be. So not only did we work with Ray out at UNF for Earth Week, but then the minute we got into Applejack's with Mike Snyder and Alex
Gregory.
Alex Gregory, correct. That's when Ray started coming into play again, and then one thing leads to another, and Ray and I believe when you were there managing, I think we started a songwriter circle there as well. I was with Ray Myers, and some other folks. I mean, we went at it pretty hard trying to promote the original music scene from our end.
I told Steve that he performed there, maybe in one of those circles.
It's very possible
he forgot.
did.
I think
He did. See how easy you forget when you become a big internet radio star? You just forget all of us.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned Mudville, where you are now, where you bring in your acts and the artist. I mean, you make a very concerted effort to sell it market it as a listening room.
Most definitely.
Okay, so you're coming in and you are listening. This is not the time for conversation, cell phone chatter. This is listening to the artist, which, as an artist, Shaq, that has to be gratifying.
It's the most gratifying of all things. It is absolutely. You can play in front of thousands of people, but when you're in an intimate setting like Ray has provided for musicians, both local and touring artists, when you sit down in a room and everyone's attention is on you and everything's working, there is nothing better than that in existence for me.
Now, given we are in an age of constant distraction, are you finding, and I'll go to Ray first, then I'll go to Shaq, are you finding it harder to get people to turn off the distractions during a concert in the listening room, or are we pretty much playing for the choir? These people understand it when they walk in, pay their admission. They don't want to be distracted.
Most people do not want to be distracted. Occasionally there are a few people that come in that hasn't been there. I have to remind them, and some local people forget. But take it back to another story. About 2 years ago on Facebook, someone talked about going to a concert at the Ponte Vedra Concert Hall, and people all around them talked. And someone's message back there was, "You needed Ray Lewis." And of course, from the artist side, I've had so many artists tell me, "Wow, I'm not used to people listening." So I wouldn't do it any other way. If I had to be there every night when the people were talking loud, I would just stay at home because there's so many places you can go to hear where music is a background, but I don't want to be background for anything that I do, never.
Yeah.
And that harkens back to the days of Applejacks because they were strict. They adhered to that rule. I mean, did the same thing Ray would do. They would get on stage, and then Ray continued that when he was managing Applejacks and say, "This is a listening room. Keep your conversations to a minimum." There were signs everywhere. There were signs on the table, and it was strictly enforced. And that's how you get the respect. I mean, if you ask anybody who plays in town here original music and has been doing it for a long time, Ray's name is going to come up.
Right.
Applejacks is going to come up because they started it, and Ray is continuing to do it in an amazing way to this day. And
even the owners of the original Applejacks comes to my concerts now.
Yes.
So that's
yeah.
quite an honor for me.
I was going to say that is a nod of appreciation and not only acceptance but respect.
And they always, when I have a benefit, they always make a donation for our raffles, and they're still supporting music after all these years.
How do you keep it fresh? You've done it for 12 and a half years. Is there quality control, or are you at the point, like I think you said, the owner said, "Well, this won't last. You'll run out of acts."
Well, that was at European Street, but when I went over to Mudville, of course, European Street was a restaurant, and music was in part of the restaurant, and it was not a fit for them or the music. And
Gotcha.
So when I went to Mudville, it would be in a totally separate room. That room is dedicated just for the music, and what was your question again?
Well, how do you keep it fresh, and what's the quality control? Because if people know this is there and it's a listening room, I could come up and say, "Hey, I got a band. I want to come in and play," and I'm sure you get that.
Oh, I do. And 9 out of 10 calls I get from local people wanting to come play in Mudville Music Room. My first question now has become, "Have you ever been in the Mudville Music Room?" 9 out of 10 have not. So I said, where's your support? and most of them want to do cover music, and we do mostly original music.
Talk a little bit about that, and then Shaq, I'd like you to intone on that because you've got some great songs you've written over the years.
Thank you.
Why that? Why? Because Shaq does wonderful covers, so why not say, yeah, come in and do covers? Why the original? Why do you push for that?
Well, you can hear covers about any time, and there's, I think, the person who brought attention for me for original music was someone you mentioned earlier, David Pooler. Even though Mike was writing songs back then, but somehow David, it was more apparent that he was doing original music, and I started paying more and more attention to it, and most
to original music in general.
Yes, and just something I want to hear, and I don't. Of course, we have another series. Luke Peacock hosts something called Other People's Music, and he has two guests, and they sing songs from people I never heard of before, and some that you have heard, and so they're introducing through that format, introducing me to a lot more people's music
and the audience,
their favorite songwriters,
sure, and the audience, which is really cool.
Yes, first, a lot of people had doubts of that format, but I think it's really neat.
Oh, it's very cool.
Yeah, and this coming Friday, if I have the date right, the 23rd of February, as we're recording this, just a few days away, there's Mike's Mike, which is a monthly feature at the Listening Room.
Yes.
Tell us about this one coming up, which by the time you listen to this, you'll have missed it, but pay attention to the next one.
Well, I'll mention Luke, and of course, the original Songwriter Circle started with Larry Mangum and Mike Shackelford and Jamie DeFreitas, and then Mike and I discussed a few years back about him doing a series there, and we came up with the name Mike's Mike, and his as adapted and evolved into bringing in his a lot of old band members, and with special guests. And then Luke's those three local people presenting their music here is the basis of my local support here in town, and it's because there are three of the historic people, and they're coming together again. And it happened to be Mike's night that we were going to do
It's
this.
always powerful. I mean, it's a good trio up
One of
there.
my favorite things I've ever done.
Yeah, and I was at the first one I think you did, and I couldn't believe it. It was just so good.
Yeah, that was over the little European Street.
Yeah.
A little bit of room over there.
So, Shaq, to you on the original music, it's got to touch your soul when you get up on stage, do your music, and then do it again and again, and people are listening, clapping, applauding, and then over the years requesting.
Yeah.
Talk to us about that. That's cool.
Well, it's as I said, it was the reason I started. I wanted to be a musician. I wanted to write songs. My very first driving force, when it was serious, not when I saw the Beatles in '64 and I tried to hammer out a guitar things and just fell by the wayside. Then high school happened and football happened. And then when I got out of high school, dabbled at college, then all of a sudden it hit me again. I saw and heard Chris Christopherson, and I thought that I want to write. I want to be known as a songwriter. And as I said here today, almost 65 years old, I want that to be my legacy, my songs that I've written through the years. And if it were not for people like Ray, and you spoke about David Pooler, Kent and I loved David, although we were writing our own stuff when Justin was at the height of their popularity at Steak and Ale. We were covering a handful, maybe 5, 6 songs of David Pooler's, and always touting him. We would have him be a guest artist with us. So
Cruising through
Boston, South Dakota.
Yeah.
I mean, just on and on. A great songwriter. So I agree with that. But the opportunity to play with Larry and Jamie, because when we did come to Jacksonville, that was a name that came up repeatedly when original music was brought up. Larry's name, Jamie's name was brought up. And all these years later, to be able to sit down with the two of them as good friends as we are and make magic happen again and again with the songs that we write. Now, the thing with Mike's Mike, though, is when I approach Ray, it's like, Larry's got the songwriter circle. Let's don't make mine about original music only. Let's make it be organic. Let's let it be, if the guests want to play original stuff only, fine. If they want to play songs that were inspired by the people that inspired them to become songwriters, I think that's a beautiful thing too, because then you get to peel away the layers and find out why Larry Mangum came to Florida from, Carolina.
Right.
Why he wrote the songs he did. Why Jamie came from where he did in the Midwest to come to Jacksonville, write the songs that he wrote. So I'm going to dig at those guys Friday night and get them to open up on a few covers. Now, that'll be difficult with Jamie. Every now and then he'll play a Beatles song or something. He'll play something.
Well, when you're Jamie.
Well, when you're
why
Jamie,
play anybody else?
All you have to really do when you're Jamie is walk in the room and just say, hey.
Yeah.
Hey.
Going back to the original music, when you started writing, and I was speaking of David Pooler's songs earlier on that got my attention, but it wasn't as accepted as much back then.
Mm-hmm.
When do you think that the changeover came when people wanted to hear your original music? And
good question.
Well, that is a good question. I have to be honest. When we started writing, it was part of our show so much that people expected us to do the songs that we had written. Now, did the originals outweigh the cover material? No, they didn't. But our cover material was so obscure in the days of Justin, we never really did. We were not like a top 40. I mean, we got into that later on in the 80s. We started playing top 40. We started playing Mellencamp and Springsteen and stuff like that. But before that, we kind of had a reputation as doing original stuff. Some of it was on the humorous side, some songs that were written for us by our manager, and some other stuff. But I would think that, to answer your question on the button, I would think in the late 70s, because we were getting airplay on some local stations from our albums with some of the original stuff. We were involved in some promotions with Rock 105 where some of our original stuff had been chosen along with other bands in town. So I think it happened, at least by the 1980s, people were expecting that when they came to see me and Justin, that there were going to be original material involved, because we were promoting David's material. We were doing shows where it focused on at least half of the stuff would be original, half would be cover.
And what was, as I remember we're talking 40 years now back.
Right?
Take a breath on that one. What I remember about the Justin performances is that they were you just kept going from a song to another to another. There was always humor involved at appropriate spots. And there were those times you do a cover, we didn't know if it was a Justin song, or you do an original and you wouldn't say, hey, we just wrote this.
Yeah, we never
that
said.
Self-pontification.
The only time we would ever acknowledge an original was if it was from Pooler or someone else. Yes. We would say, this is a song written by.
Right.
But that was mine and Kent's ironclad rule. We would go from cover to original seamlessly. Because I still teach that to people that I talk to now about this kind of thing. I spoke to a guy in Nashville just the other day, and I said, if you want what you want is, if you cover something, you want to cover a song the same way you would cover your own original. Make them to where you own it. You write your original song, you play it the way you want to play it, you put your style to it, and when you cover another artist, approach it the same way. And make that song your own, so that people, of course, they know it was written by the Rolling Stones, but the thread, the feel, is the same kind of feel that you give your own flavor to your own original. So therefore, you're stamping your original, you're owning that cover, just like you own your original material.
I remember sitting in Gary Smalley's living room with you and Gary, and you were talking that same thing. it's where somebody would say, well, you did a Stone song, for instance, but it didn't sound like them. And it's got to sound like you.
Yeah,
it's their song.
If I gave Mick and Keith one of my songs, I guarantee you they would do what they wanted. If they
more attention
chose to record it, they would do what they wanted to. They wouldn't say, what do you think we should do?
Yeah, exactly.
So since I don't have them around to say.
Well, the original music, the Peyton Brothers, another band from that era, Applejack's era, they were great performers, and they had very few original songs. But when they did cover a song, they usually talked about the writers, and again, that brought more attention to me about songwriters and through their education. And they did Mississippi John Hurt's "Make Me a Pallet on Your Floor," and just last week we had a benefit for the Mississippi John Hurt Foundation, and so that they made me aware of back then who Mississippi John Hurt was. So education about the songwriters is so important,
sure.
and I guess a lot of people don't really think about it so much, but it got instilled in what I was doing somehow. So through all those contacts.
ASCAP has been involved over the last few years in some legal issues with major acts to get more recognition to songwriters.
Yes, that's correct.
I've been reading more about that. So when they're streaming, for instance, to get more change for you if they're streaming one of your songs.
Right.
Yeah. Before I forget, this podcast will be live as of March 15th, so you folks will be hearing it. So I'm looking at RayLewisPresents.com again at the concert calendar, and it happens to be on the 15th, Larry Mangum's playing.
All right, yes.
Yeah. And you will find all the way the 16th, is it Joe Jenks?
Yes, he's a first-time in touring singer-songwriter.
Okay. 17th, St. Patrick's Day, Walker Brothers, Old Dogs, New Tricks.
Well, the Walker Brothers, Landon Walker, who's had a famous radio show to public radio here for years, he and his brother, they're also performing during the day out at Culhane's Irish Pub for St. Patrick's Day. Then Old Dogs with New Kilts is the Walker Brothers, along with Carlton Higginbotham and John Roach, and probably Linda Minky. I'll be in fiddle too that night.
Mm-hmm. And then I see Mike Shackelford will be back on March 23rd.
I will be back there.
You'll be back there. And then there are more. You can see this all the way. He has it at this point into June. Let's see. In talking about this, the original music again, Shaq has been involved now here in Atlantic Beach for going on 15 years with a songwriters night. And that obviously encourages songwriters. Is it getting harder to get play and acceptance as a songwriter, or is it easier because all you got to do is put on your smartphone, or maybe it's not a smartphone, a quick phone, and video yourself and put it up on social media? Or is it a wash? Is it the same as it was 40 years ago?
Wow, I don't know, man. I think obviously, it's not the same because you can reach. I mean, I've been known to say to people before, if we had the technology we have now, back in the day when we were all in our prime and hitting on all cylinders, we would be maybe setting in a different studio, a larger studio now, having this conversation.
Well, no, I kind of like
but
this
I love
intimate
it.
studio.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, maybe we could upgrade a bunch of stuff.
Our cars.
Yeah, right. I don't know. I think it would certainly be easier to be recognized now with original material. I mean, there's so much stuff out there. There's so many people doing it. But it comes down to being real. It just comes down to sitting in a room with people and engaging those people to listen to what the words you've written and what you have in your heart. And it's to me, that has always been the same. It has always been hard to do.
That's a great point.
And it's going to always be. You can put a video on and fancy it up and do whatever you want to do. But when they come to see you in the room, can you do that in the room?
Right.
So I think my good buddy Walter Parks, who I love dearly, we all know him, and he's a wonderful musician. Splits time between Savannah and Jersey City, Jacksonville native. When he was at Songwriter Night a few months ago, he said to me, Shaq, You got to always keep it real. If you're going to do one of those home videos or whatever, he says, as long as it's real, that's what people want to see. And I completely agree with that.
Resonates. Got to resonate.
Resonates, yeah. I mean, you can do it because the quick phone can do a lot of things.
The quick phone is not necessarily a smartphone sometimes on how we use it.
Speaking of that technology, a lot of technology is keeping people at home, too. They're not coming out to the venues as much. And, of course, everyone says I'm doing too many shows, and I do what I do. So I've been having to turn down a lot of touring artists now because I asked them, I said, do you have a fan base here? And most of them don't. And I said, well, nobody's going to come. And I hate that.
Yeah.
I would want people to be in the room every night to hear whomever I place on that stage.
That's the business part of this. I mean, you got to eat.
Well, no.
You got to pay the bills.
I'm not concerned. I get by with my retirement check, and of course I got expenses too, along with the internet fees and the newsletter fees and equipment replacement. Even though I was someone donated a lot of equipment to me recently, and that's something I could not have done. But there's still other upgrades I have to keep making all the time. And no, I'm not in this for the money. I know after the Apple Jacks days, I started promoting, and my goal was to break even. I probably should have set my goal a lot higher. And, I want to keep the music going. I'm not concerned. And, of course, the way the business and industry is now, I'm not happy about it, but it's the only way I can stay in it. Like a lot of other listening rooms around the country, people are playing for a percentage of the door. And that's the only way that all of us listening rooms can keep doing it. A lot of musicians I see post all the time, they want the owners of the venue to pay them. Well, the owners of the venue are not making much money. And I've known a lot of owners, and I've heard them talk from their point of view, too. And so, and if I was in it for the profit, I would have quit a long time ago.
Yeah, and you'd mentioned to me off mic before we started that one of the reasons you left corporate is you were following your happy trail. You were looking for your happy place, and it was music. And to stay with it, and Shaq, you know this, I mean, being a musician, and as I've heard musicians say that where else would you find somebody working for the same wage they did 40 years ago?
Yeah,
you
right.
Get a plumber to do that,
Yeah,
right?
right.
So you got to love it. I mean, you have to love it. And it has to speak not only to the audience, but it's got to speak to your soul, your heart.
Correct.
All right, let's finish with this. I'll throw it to Shaq, and then Ray, you'll have the last word. Anything that you'd want to put out there about local music, original music, listening rooms, young artists, anything. I'm just going to leave it to you. What do you want to speak to? What you want to leave us with?
I would say I'm big into young artists now, following their dreams. If they want to be in music and they want to write songs, to do that and to seek people like Ray out. Come to me, come to Larry Mangum, come to people that have an opportunity to supply a venue and an opportunity for them to grow their craft. And it's a craft, it's art, it's a creation that has to continue to evolve, and the only way to have that happen is to get out and play. That's the one thing that from day one in the 70s when I started, I realized that the more you work, the better you get. The better you get, the better you want to get. It's just a continuous thing. And if you ever get to a point where you're skating along and you think you can't learn anything else, then you've made a wrong turn somewhere, because there's always something to learn. There's always something that has to be adapted to. And again, I go back to, if it weren't for Ray Lewis in this town over the years, the decades that I've been here, my career would be different. It would have been impacted in a different way, a negative, a more, it would have been harder to work in front of people who wanted to hear you. And when they want to hear you and you provide that for them, then you start to understand, I have value.
Yeah.
I am growing, resilience and growth, just like your radio show. That's what Ray and people like Ray who continue to work to try to break even, to supply something for musicians like me. I can't put a price tag on how much that means to me.
That's powerful, yeah. And one thing, and then we'll give it to Ray. when you were speaking, what I was hearing, you said, like, seek out a Larry Mangum, seek out a Mike Shackelford, a Ray Lewis. I would also think that when you seek them out, you better have something to offer. And it's not just saying, I need a gig, I want a gig, I want to
Correct.
play. There has to be a relationship you're developing.
Correct.
Here. And I know you're a master at that. You always have been.
Well.
In a good way, not in a manipulative way, in a very good way.
Amen.
And that is what the young artists need to pay attention to.
Right. I think they do.
Yeah.
If you're serious, get serious.
Yeah.
Be serious.
Yeah. Ray, finish it for us.
I think more so than ever, it's a grassroots movement that we have to depend on to keep the music flowing. And I mentioned too before that having all people wanting to come play, there's more to it than that. And I've tried different avenues of getting music out there. The Ladies with the Lyrics and the series, and the people were not coming. The Songwriter contest, and people were not coming, and then followed up on that with the artist showcase, and nobody was coming to support that. So there's been a lot of formats I've tried to keep more of the local artists involved, but the support for it, and even a lot of artists were not coming as they should have, and we need the people in those seats, and of course. I got to keep the venue happy, but we don't have to pay rent. But the owner expects to have some money flowing for him. That would be our rent. So more than ever, we need people supporting this instead of staying home and watching YouTube.
Well put. Gentlemen, thank you, and thanks for, you had to make it through the paparazzi out there and all the photos and everything. I understand. It's tough here at the studio. It is. So listeners, thank you for joining us today. Without you, there's no Growth and Resilience Network. Thank you for sharing our podcast with family, friends, colleagues, and community leaders. Visit my website, stevepiscitelli.com, for more information about upcoming conversations on the GRN and about programs and other resources. And please don't forget, RayLewisPresents.com, and again, Lewis, Lewis. So until we meet again virtually or somewhere in person around this great nation, this is Steve Piscitelli reminding all of us, choose well, live well, and be well. And also, as Ray and I know Shaq would say, continue to create, share, and savor powerful movements. Bye-bye, folks.